Most taxpayers think they know how the IRS tax relief programs work. They've heard the ads on the radio or they've seen the commercials that say, hey, settle your tax debt for pennies on the dollar. But here's the truth, most of what they heard is dead wrong. And believing the wrong thing doesn't just waste time, but it can cost your clients thousands of dollars. So today, I'm breaking down the top 5 IRS myths and what you need to know to set the record straight. Welcome to Let's Talk Taxes Tuesday. I am Nafisa Munir, your tax attorney CEO who rescues businesses and individuals with tax debt and trains the next generations of attorneys, CPAs, and EAs to do the same. Welcome. I'm so glad you decided to join me for another episode of Let's Talk Taxes Tuesday. So let's just jump right into it because today we're going to take on the 5 myths that are most common and most costly that your clients believe about IRS tax relief programs. The number one myth is the IRS forgives everything under the Fresh Start program. Now, clients hear the words fresh start and they think that it's some kind of magical amnesty program, some type of magical program that's just going to forgive all their debts, that's going to wipe them away with the stroke of a wand. But the reality is, the Fresh Start program isn't just about new money or forgiveness. What it simply is, it's just a group of tools which can be used to help clients resolve tax debt issues, right? It's a group of tools, the offer and compromise, the installment agreement, the currently not collectible status, the penalty abatement. These are just tools which can be used for you to help your client resolve their tax debt. So the problem is when clients believe this myth, they sign up for these shady tax debt relief companies that promise them this pennies on the dollar. And it wastes a lot of your clients' time. And not only that, it can be very costly for your clients because these OIC applications, once they're filed, it stops the statute of limitations from running. So it could add months, maybe even years to your client's um, statute of limitations. It could add years. And so instead of it being 10 years, if it sits in OIC for 2 years, that's going to be additional 2 years that can be added to your clients. So this could be very, very costly for your client. And it's something that you want to make sure that you set the record straight on this particular myth. The second myth is anyone can get an offer and compromise. One of the biggest myths out there is that anyone can settle with the IRS for pennies on a dollar. Well, here's the truth. The OIC acceptance rate for 2024, according to the IRS latest data book, was only 21%. Of all the offer and compromise applications that the IRS received last year, they only accepted 21% of the offers. So this dispels the myth that your client may believe that the IRS is just automatically just handing out offer and compromise acceptances out here. That's not what's happening. But again, if your client believes this and they believe that it's automatic, right? They're already setting themselves up for failure and they're already setting themselves up again to waste time before they even pay you or pay someone else that did not get them the result that was best for them. Okay? Myth number 3. If you can't pay, the IRS is just going to leave you alone. Right? And the sad part about it is a lot of people have gotten comfortable in these last couple of years since the pandemic because, the IRS basically had put a pause on collections over the last few years since the pandemic. They put a pause on collections. So people weren't receiving notices or weren't receiving them as frequently as they were receiving them previously. So they kind of maybe thought that the IRS, if I just ignore them, if I just ignore the IRS, this will go away. Well, the IRS has since ramped up again their collection and enforcement effort. And so people need to understand that they can't just ignore the IRS, right? And that a currently not collectible status is not a status that's automatic. It requires them to submit what? Financial documentation, and it requires them to be in compliance. So it's not as simple as I'm just going to ignore the IRS. And meanwhile, while they're ignoring the IRS, penalties and interest are continually to accrue and pile up the amount of money that the clients are going to have to pay. So we have to set the record straight to dispel this particular myth. The fourth myth is that installment agreements wipe away penalties. Installment agreements, of course, are a great tool, but they do not make penalties and interest go away. What we have to keep in mind is that the IRS is going to charge penalties and interest as long as the debt is outstanding and unresolved. Okay. So even if your client or there's an installment agreement that's been set up, you have to keep in mind that those penalties and interest are still going to accrue. And you have to make sure that you let your client know this as well, because they might just get thinking, oh, I only owe $50,000. Let me go ahead and spread out that $50,000, not realizing that when they finally get finished paying it, it's going to be way more than $50,000 because while they're in that payment paying status, that penalties and interest had continued to accrue to add to their balance. So this is something that we have to make sure that we make clear with our clients so we can set the right expectation. And finally, myth number 5. Penalty abatement is automatic. Let's talk about penalties. Most people think that the IRS automatically wipes away their penalties if they just ask. The truth of the matter is, there are basically 2 different types of penalties abatement, and that's going to be your first time penalty abatement, right? And then there's going to be the regular penalty abatement. And even the first time penalty abatement is not just about them asking. Now, a lot of times it can be the case, but they have to ask. They're not going to automatically grant it. And I know that we, as practitioners in this area, a lot of times if we can, we can request this by speaking to the IRS over the phone on our client's behalf, right? If they're eligible for it. Now, even when we talk about the regular penalty abatement, again, it's not automatic. We have to let our clients know for this particular type of penalty abatement that there has to be reasonable cause. And in order to claim reasonable cause, we're going to have to submit documentation. And depending on the circumstances, that could be heavy documentation. So the point is not just automatically granted. We have to ask, and depending on what type of penalty abatement we are seeking, right? We may have to submit significant documentation, right? So those basically are our 5 myths. The first one was the first myth that we dispelled was that the IRS does not forgive everything under the Fresh Start program. Second is the second myth was anyone can get an offer in compromise. We dispelled this myth and said, no, you have to be qualified. The third myth is you can't pay. The IRS will just leave you alone. No, the IRS is not just going to leave you alone. You have to, if you want to get currently not collectible status, you have to ask for it and submit documentation as well as make sure your client is in compliance. And the fourth myth that we dispelled was that installment agreements don't wipe away penalties. Okay. In fact, while your client is in an installment agreement, penalties and interest are continuing to accrue until your client is fully paid. So we want to make sure we're setting the right expectation. And the fifth penalty that we dispelled today was that penalty abatements are not automatic, whether you're talking about the first time penalty abatement or the reasonable cause penalty abatement. You have to ask, and depending on which type, you have to submit documentation, right? So you have to make sure that you're setting the record straight with your clients because you want to make sure that you are setting up for them reasonable expectations, right? This is making sure this also builds credibility and trust with your client when you are being straight with them and telling them what the real deal is. These myths aren't just harmless misunderstandings either. They can cost your clients a lot of wasted time and thousands of dollars. But when you bust these myths for your client, when you dispel these myths for your client, you are in fact saving your client money, saving your client time, and you're building your reputation and establishing yourself as one who can be trusted, right, to help them out. So, if you want to master these strategies of offer and compromise, installment agreement, right, currently not collectible status, penalty abatement, and others, if you want to learn more about this, right, and know how to deliver it in a more profitable manner, join me this October at Tax Magic Live. I'm going to be excited for you to join me at this event where you can move from a generalist to a tax representation specialist. Make sure you contact me at taxroadmapusa.com. And thank you for joining me today on this episode of Let's Talk Taxes Tuesday. And I'll see you next time on the next episode. Until then, have a prosperous week. Bye.